Welcome to the 8th edition of the Eastern Himalayan Nature Economics Forum. This year the theme is Ecology is Economy. And I have two interesting people who are working on an initiative that brings together environment and how restoring it will reduce unsafe migration. So today I have Hasina, Kharbhih, who is the founder of Impulse NGO Network and Impulse Social Enterprises. They have about 20 years behind this organization, and it's an award-winning Impulse Model Lab. And Saurav Malhotra, co-founder and designer of Rural Futures Framework at Balipara Foundation, envision creating this interdependence between ecology and economy.
Thanks, Karma. Thanks for having us. I think what I'd like to talk about is that this interdependence has really always been there. We've just sort of forgotten that this link exists and therefore are facing the current climate crisis. So if you look at how agriculture began, so about 7,000 years ago, humans were actually foraging from forests, and humans were developing forests for agricultural purposes and for food. The Amazon rainforest is a great example of how humans have actually helped curate a forest for agricultural purposes. What has happened between then and now is that about half of our population in the world lives in rural areas. But it's the entire world's population that is dependent on natural resources, be it forest resources, be it water, or even the air that you breathe. It all comes from forest and natural-based resources. All the wealth of the world, on the other hand, is accumulating in urban hotspots, right? So 97% of the wealth of the world is residing in urban hotspots, whereas half of the world's people are living in rural areas. So there has been an overexploitation, there's been overconsumption, and I think because of these two reasons, we are currently facing the climate crisis, global warming, all the floods that we see. The connection there is also that environmental degradation that has led to climate crisis actually leads to many challenges within indigenous communities. So many of our communities in the Eastern Himalayan region live on the front lines of climate challenges. For example, communities, the Mission community in the Kaziranga National Park area live on the front lines of flood-based challenges. But there is deforestation happening across the zones. In the Northeast, we have lost about 100,000 hectares of forest in the last year. This results in water shortages, lack of groundwater table resurgence, reduction in soil fertility, and therefore reduction in agricultural output. And about 70% of India's population is dependent on agriculture, and maybe even about 85% of the Northeast's population is dependent on agriculture. So by destroying the environment, we're actually reducing people's access to livelihoods. And by doing this, people do not have access to livelihoods anymore. Agricultural yields have gone down. Therefore, the amount of revenue that you earn every year has also gone down, which is what is driving people to, say, move from Kaziranga to Delhi, Kaziranga to Bombay, Kaziranga to Bangalore for jobs. These jobs are not always nice jobs, right? I mean, you spend 70% of what you earn on a house, and you send some money back home, and you have nothing really left. So it is environmental degradation that drives the lack of social assets. People don't have access to education, healthcare, energy, water, which drives people to move. Through the Rural Futures Framework, through Ecology is Economy this year, what we are trying to say is that environment is the economy. So the global economy, in fact, 70% of the global economy comes from the environment directly. So what is the whole debate about, and the fact that for this post-COVID plan, the whole world is creating a post-COVID plan, we need to keep the environment at the center stage. We need to figure how we can create green jobs for all the people who've migrated back to where they belong, how these green jobs can be linked to the growth of the environment and not the degradation. So this is what we want to talk about, and I think that we will arrive at a policy blueprint at the end of it as a recommendation, not only for the northeastern states of India, but for the Eastern Himalayan countries as well.
Right. And someone who's, seeing this change on the ground. Hasina was traveling through COVID and floods also to understand how it's really impacting the people. Hasina, do you think, since you've worked so much to help people as far as unsafe migration is concerned, works now, this model?
If you're looking at the unsafe migration aspect, I think the lockdown on COVID has made it more visible to the entire world that people are returning back and livelihood will be completely a challenge. And we who have been working with livelihood initiative over the last 13 years through Impulse Social Enterprises have seen that women have had the power of economics, the power of market and resilience, and that has helped them to make decision not to migrate unsafely. Now they're coming back, just weaving and textile will not be enough to create jobs at a local level. So looking at from the context that they're living in an environment which has richness, and that environment can actually become a revenue, an ecosystem that can come together. So the co-creation is completely a valuable aspect of how communities, indigenous population, communities who are migrating back home can actually create jobs which is more local based.
Right. And so you told me that, about 100,000 acres of forests, hectares of forests have been lost here in the Northeast. So in a way, if more people are coming back, hence their dependence, on the forests will even be more. So do you see more degradation? Is there, bigger challenges ahead for you?
Yeah, I think it is both a challenge and an opportunity, depending on how we really play the next few months. I think the next few months are absolutely critical. So what we have seen through a lot of our work on the ground is that many people who say have been away from home for the last 4 to 5 years are now coming back to the areas where we have been implementing the Rural Futures model of the Balipara Foundation. And people now see prospect and aspirations in the villages. Many of the youth that chose to not migrate along with their peers now have jobs together with our projects. Not jobs per se, but entrepreneurial sort of ventures through nature, right? So the way that we've been creating jobs is by growing forests, growing nurseries, growing agroforests. So your livelihood then is linked positively to the planting of trees, to the growth of forests, and to the growth of your farms, to the enhancement of biodiversity on your farms by converting them to agroforestry-based initiatives. So it is a very fine line between overpopulation being a heightened pressure on the forests and therefore deforestation. It could very easily go that way. But what we have to collectively push now through a national mandate, through a regional mandate for the Eastern Himalayas, is to create green jobs at this point in time, is to show people that there is a path which is not the path of environmental degradation, but is a path of conservation. And in fact, in the long term, many of our data, many of the modeling that we've done actually proves that the amount of revenue that you will be earning through these nature pro jobs is actually much more than what you would be earning by chopping a forest. So the economics speak for themselves, but we need to have a solid collective push now to make sure that we can implement the model, and then after a year, the economics will actually talk for itself.
But Saurav, it's also about greed, isn't it? You say that such projects are sustainable, and there is a way for people to make money. But again, the question comes back, how much is enough? People can get greedy. So if they see a source of livelihood coming in from the forest, what stops them from over-exploiting the natural resources?
I think our communities in the Eastern Himalayan zone, and I can especially talk about our experiences with the Boro community through our projects in the Udalguri and the Sonitpur districts, is that people have already suffered the causes of overexploitation in the early 90s, in the early 2000s. A lot of the forests of Assam were lost back in those days for reasons that we're all aware of. And the consequences of that destruction have been apparent over the last 10 years. So in fact, we, through most of our work, it's not even about raising awareness. It's just about facilitating action. I don't think that we need to raise awareness amongst the people here, amongst the indigenous tribes here, about the importance of forests. Many of the tribes, many of the people who I meet on the ground know much more about it than I do, because they've grown up in the forest. The only thing that we try and do is facilitate action so that in a span of 6 months, in a span of 1 year, if your average household income goes up by 40%, by converting your monoculture farm into an agroforest and by planting a few trees, that then drives, And another aspect here, I think, is really trying to work with communities and not with individual groups. I think what really helps is to create community power, is to create community autonomy, is to enhance communities' abilities to make decisions. Along with the youth, along with the women, along with the elders, when you do that, then democracy prevails. And then one person's greed, because I mean, you know, one person's greed will always be there, you know, but then democracy prevails and community institutions will be strong enough to combat that in the future.
So it's for the communities to see a greater good, yeah, in preserving and taking little, which of course will help them sustain. Hasina, for a person who's been on the ground all the time and worked with individuals, worked with communities, now this vision that you have of this co-creation, which is a very interesting one, how sustainable is it, and how do you intend to take it 100 miles, say, to start with?
Well, if you're looking at one single organization intervening, unsafe migration or stopping slavery or human trafficking, I think it will be next to impossible. And one organization making a value chain from an end to end to create jobs is not possible at all, looking in terms of the population size. And if we are looking at the Eastern Himalayan, countries like Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh are also countries which has been a source, a transit, and also a destination. And India, for that matter, the Northeast, where we are located, has been the, I would say, the entry gate of transit point. So if we have to really reduce that and make people choose to stay back home and stay back within their own economics, then we need to actually give them viability within their own community. So viability can only be created if organization comes together. So it's more, the co-creation model is more on collective leadership, because we as an organization over the years has always believed that leadership cannot be by one single individual, one single organization. Collective leadership will have to engage multiple organizations having common vision, where vision can actually be integrated. Integrated to focus on the larger good and the larger change. And if you're looking at the co-creation between rural futures and impulse model prevention, it's basically bringing larger change that affects communities, that affects human beings and their rights. So in a democracy, we are talking about human rights, we are talking about our rights and entitlement. But if we don't create economic livelihood, then the rights will only be addressed after they're being exploited. So here we're looking at preventing before exploitation, and the co-creation is going to bring value because the Eastern Himalayan has richness of agriculture, richness of environment, richness of indigenous population. By and large, I think over the years people have moved out because they didn't see the value of it. Now we are trying to say that through the co-creation, the example and the pilot that has been tested can actually come together, merge together collectively, and bring forward more opportunities for the people so that they have choices not to migrate unsafely.
Right. And Balipara Foundation, I guess, is bringing together an international community of scientists and experts from all over the world to see that this really does become a reality and works on the ground. So that really helps. That now, sort of, as far as the brass tacks are concerned, how will it really work? How are you kind of dividing the work between Rural Futures and Impulse?
Yeah. So in fact, I mean, how are we going to roll it out? And in fact, we already have a pilot undergoing as we speak in the Garo Hills and also in Kaziranga. How this really works, Karma, is because we currently work in different geographies to the Impulse model. The Impulse model is already working transnationally, which is also our geographic spread focus area for on the ground work. And Impulse model interventions have focused on using arts and crafts and culture as a way of restoring people's livelihoods. Our interventions will be linked to engaging people in reforestation groups. In fact, we have already created an agroforestry group in the Panbari area where Impulse has been working for the last 20 so years. And our focus is, so we will basically go into a space altogether. Impulse is going to be focusing on their expertise of livelihoods, which is arts, crafts, culture, mostly related to weaves. We will be focusing on our implementation focuses, which is creating youth groups to promote agroforestry, organizing groups, building group autonomy for reforestation, and showing the paths of how leadership within communities. So in fact, ultimately success of the program is not just leadership between Impulse and Rural Futures, Balipara Foundation, but about all the other organizations that we get, about how we build leadership within communities, and how, because we will not remain in a certain place for more than 5 to 6 years, because we'll have to move our focus from here to there, so we can actually scale out. But we have to build local leadership through the youths to ensure that the model goes far beyond me or Hasina or anybody else. So that is the goal, and that has been the primary focus of a lot of my initiatives through the Balipara Foundation, and it's been a focus to build leadership in the ground, build local stewardship of natural assets. So I think that the combinatorial approach of building local stewardship for the arts and crafts and cultures and local stewardship for natural assets, that is how both the organization's expertises would be mixed. And I think this creates a really holistic framework to create livelihoods that are sustainable, and then to give people the autonomy to do whatever they think is best for them with these livelihoods. So as an example, if a community owns a forest, right? If you are earning, many of our estimates suggest that from 1 hectare of forest, you'll earn about 10 lakh rupees a year. If you have 100 hectares, that's a lot of money, right? So what does a community do with that money will be through a democratic fashion be decided by the community. So if you feel that your school is run down, you can decide to build a new school for your community. You can decide to build a new healthcare center for your communities. You can decide to transform households. So it's not really only about building livelihoods, but it is about taking that a step further, because I think building livelihoods will not satisfy the aspirations of youth, right? Youth not only move from Guwahati to Bombay for aspirations, for livelihoods, but they also move for aspirations. They want to go to a cinema hall, and you want to meet people of other cultures, buy a car, for example. So we think that it is possible to create these aspirational futures in rural areas without making them urban areas. India cannot afford more urban areas. All our urban areas are overpopulated and are a huge bane on the economy. So by creating these aspirational futures, by giving community power and stewardship of their natural resources, communities will be able to create their vision of an aspirational village.
Right. And Hasina, most of the work here that you're looking at will be through the Impulse Social Enterprises, because that's what, that's the organization that's been working on livelihood.
Yes, so like Impulse model, the prevention lab actually looks in terms of economics and markets, and Impulse Social Enterprise is the driver for that. And as a hybrid model, Impulse Social Enterprise has already scaled deep. Through the model we had scaled very deep in terms of building trust among a lot of artisans that we have worked over the years, and that trust factor has also created great leadership. And those leadership are the people themselves who have navigated to expand more artisans to come on board. And that has seen, in fact, during the lockdown and COVID, when everybody is migrating, inbound migration was rising, people were losing jobs. The artisans who are part of Impulse Empower, no one lost a job. They continue to weave from home. They continue to get their income. And that has attracted more of the people who are coming back and those people who are losing livelihood to see the difference, that what it means to be back home and doing an economic which is through Impulse Social Enterprise. We have seen that, we have navigated that, and I think scaling up for us has been that we are also looking into policy change. So it's a lot of research that we have undertaken with the World Bank. We have also taken a research looking at from the lens of UNDP and Asian Development Bank, because a lot of infrastructure building will continue to happen, especially in Southeast Asia. Now, with this infrastructure, we also have to see that people will lose their land, they will lose their livelihood, they will be aspirational, as what Saurav said, that a lot of young people will want to go Southeast Asia. So if we have to ensure that these safety nets are being created, then we have to create value of markets, which is actually going to be attractive enough for the young people, which has happened, which has been piloted. We have seen that on the ground, working on the ground, because it has to be attractive for the younger population today. Now, when I use the word attractive for the younger population today, I am using words like younger people are teaching the older artisans how they can speak to the world through the social media, how they can market the product through the social media. So that is very engaging. So a mixture of the young and people who have passed generation after generation can actually emerge into a very successful economic support system. And we saw that food security was the question. We had always promoted food security over the years, but we are not an expert in food security and environment. And that's led to the why we are co-creating this whole model, because if we don't co-create, then we cannot give a holistic approach, as what Saurav has said. So that is why we have taken this step. And I see the value of this step is that people will be self-sufficient. And I think we are talking about SDG Goal 8. The whole world is talking about it. But the real work of SDG Goal 8 can only happen on the ground through co-creation model. And that's why we are taking this, to work together.
Right. And sort of at the end of the day, I don't think that there will be any end of the days, because this is something that has to evolve and you have to keep working at it. But if you look at the future, what kind of impact, what kind of changes do you see this co-creation bringing in our farms, in our villages?
Yeah. So Kamba, I think when you talk about impact, it's very easy in our field to get lost in the numbers of 40% increase in income and all of that. I used to earn 1,000. Yeah, exactly. I used to earn 1,000 rupees. Now I earn 10,000. I think all of that is important, but I don't think all of that is enough. And in fact, through the 4 years of our reforestation work, of the agroforestry work on the ground, we have figured this firsthand. When we talk to donors, I'm not happy by telling donors that, look, we planted 100,000 trees and increase incomes by so much, because I don't think it really means so much in the future. Also because I don't think that just raising your incomes means that you have a better quality of life. That connection does not exist. So we are trying to develop, in fact, in the process now, something that we call the Rural Futures Index. I'm sure you've heard about the Human Development Index, you've heard about the Gross National Happiness Index. The Rural Futures Index will be not a counter, but an add-on, which will be customized to the Eastern Himalayan zone, which will take into consideration not only the amount of money that you earn, but whether you have access to water, whether you have access to energy, whether you have access to healthcare, and how the environment or the health of the environment around you positively influences all of this, right? So the hypothesis of our co-creation is basically the fact that a healthy environment will lead to healthy, happy communities, right? And when I say healthy, happy communities, you have livelihoods, you have food, you have water, and you don't need to be elsewhere to earn a livelihood, but you can go elsewhere for a holiday. So I think that the ultimate impact will be to create communities that feel that they are well, and communities that feel that they have the ability to change their own future. So one term that we use very often in our work is socio-economic mobility, which is different to livelihoods, right? Livelihoods, we've talked about this. Socio-economic mobility is the ability of a son or a daughter to do something that the parents or grandparents have never done before. That is what we want to create. So we want to create aspirational areas where if you want to be a doctor, you can go and be a doctor. Yeah. If you want to be an artist, you can go and be an artist. So now, talking about the numbers, right? Because it's important as well, and I'm sure that many donors will watch this and they will want to know what the numbers are all about. So in a span of 2.5 years, we've been able to increase incomes across all the communities that we've worked with by about 40%. In a span of 7 to 10 years, these numbers are projected to go up by 120%. And the fact that these communities will then have community funds to say create a school or create things like that. In terms of impact also, we think that it is not enough for us to just work in the northeast of India. And the fact that we have to scale out while we continue to scale deep in the areas where we work now. So we do hope to take this co-creation forward to our neighboring countries in Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and in the near future also in Bhutan, through a spirit of partnership and through a spirit of indigenous leadership. So that really, I think, is the goal. And the day, I'm hoping in the next 3 years, 4 years, when we can say that we have created indigenous leaders who are taking this co-creation forward in their respective areas, I think that is success.
Okay, so you say the income will increase by 40% and 120% at a later stage. But I'm guessing the base will be very low, isn't it, here in the northeast?
Yeah, so average incomes in Assam is about 50,000 rupees a year as of now. So the basal rural incomes in Assam is still a bit higher than anywhere else in the northeast. but the Assam average data is about 50%, and in my experience, it varies between 30 and 70%, 30 and 70,000 rupees a year.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll take the same question to you. Now, what kind of impact will you be happy with?
Well, we're looking right now, I think the artisans who have been part and process of the work that we have been working the last 13 years, working just 2 to 3 hours a day, which is, not actually governed by any enterprise or businesses. They choose that because it's very entrepreneurial. They're earning like 5 to 6,000 a month. So that itself is an additional add-on income which the women are being able to bring home. And it also creates a gender equity in terms of the participation of both men and women within the communities, because that has been existing in traditional indigenous population, where I think it got washed out by the world, where they didn't really see the gender equity, because you see the family in the farm as well as in the home. So we are creating that because we saw that the women was bringing income, which is additional, and the men are also participating in the process. And I think with the value addition of agri as well as agroforestry and others, it is going to merge in to bring in more women and men and other gender participation in a more holistic way. And I think 5 to 6,000 a month, which is already proven record of 13 years now, with an add-on of what agroforestry can bring, it is going to be a huge amount where you have your own resources, you have your own land, you have your own spaces around, and that makes a lot of difference. So I think aspiration in terms of finance is going to change the way you value everything that you have around yourself.
Right. Well, with that, we've come to the end of this talk. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'd like to thank Hasina and Saurav. Thank you very much for speaking to us. We wish you well. It's a very interesting project, and we certainly hope that going ahead it will put an end to unsafe migration and also protect our forests and environment.